Have you ever had that moment when your entire world shifts on its axis? Not with a bang or a dramatic confrontation, but with something subtle, a glance, a whisper, or in my case, the gentle clink of a champagne glass at our law firm's 10-year reunion. I was wearing the diamond earrings Kieran had given me for our 5th anniversary, my hair swept into an elegant chignon, smiling at former colleagues as Meredith, my husband's executive assistant, tapped her glass for attention. "Kieran and I have an announcement," she said, her voice carrying across the penthouse rooftop where Blackwell and Associates celebrated a decade of legal excellence. I remember the way the sunset painted the Cascade Mountains behind her in shades of amber and gold, how the Seattle skyline glittered as my husband, the man I'd supported through law school, through building his firm, stepped beside her and placed his hand on her abdomen. "We're expecting," he said, eyes never once seeking mine in the crowd. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Thalia Blackwell, and that moment at the Emerald Tower penthouse wasn't the beginning of my story. It was the middle. The part where everything falls apart before it rebuilds into something stronger. I'd spent 7 years as Kieran's wife, the dutiful partner who entertained clients, organized charity galas, and sacrificed my own legal career to support his ambitions. That night, as champagne flutes froze midair and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd, I didn't create a scene. I simply set down my glass, nodded once at Meredith's 4-carat engagement ring, my grandmother's, I noticed, and walked out the door with my dignity intact. The elevator ride down 68 floors gave me just enough time to process what had happened. Not the affair. I'd suspected something for months. Not even the pregnancy. A betrayal, certainly, but not a surprise. What cut deepest was the public humiliation, the calculated way they'd chosen our firm's celebration to announce their relationship. They wanted everyone to witness my replacement, to see the torch pass from the supportive wife who'd helped build Blackwell and Associates to the younger executive assistant who'd be the mother of Kieran's child. My Lyft driver, a woman named Zara with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor, watched me in the rearview mirror as I stared out at the rain-slicked streets of downtown Seattle. "Bad night?" she asked, navigating through the evening traffic toward my Medina waterfront home. "Just an ending," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. What Kieran didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment. Not consciously, perhaps, but somewhere deep inside, I'd sensed the foundation crumbling beneath our marriage. 3 years earlier, I'd stopped being just the founding partner's wife and quietly renewed my law license. 2 years ago, I'd opened a separate bank account where I deposited the inheritance my grandmother had left me. And 6 months ago, when I found Meredith's earring between our sheets, I'd contacted Vanya Petrov, the brilliant financial investigator who'd once been our firm's client. That night, I didn't return to our lakefront mansion with its sweeping views and cold, empty halls. Instead, I directed Zara to the Alexis Hotel downtown, checked into a suite, and made 3 phone calls. The first to Imara Okafor, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the Pacific Northwest. The second to Vanya, telling her it was time to activate our contingency plan. And the third to my former law school roommate, Riel Chen, now a senior partner at our rival firm. I slept surprisingly well that night, better than I had in months. Perhaps because for the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself, alone. The morning brought a flurry of texts and voicemails from Kieran. Not apologies, I noted, but demands to know where I was, reminders about an important client dinner that evening, instructions to be reasonable and not make a scene. I responded to none of them. Instead, I met Imara for breakfast in her private club overlooking Pike Place Market, the smell of fresh fish and flowers wafting up from below as we discussed strategy. "He's going to try to control the narrative," Imara said, spreading Himalayan honey on a piece of sourdough toast. Her silver-streaked locks were pulled back in an elegant knot, her charcoal suit impeccably tailored. Men like Kieran always do. He'll paint you as the frigid wife, the career obstacle, the woman who wouldn't. Give him children. I sipped my espresso, the bitter taste matching my thoughts. Let him try. The firm complicates things, she continued, scrolling through her tablet. Washington is a community property state, but Blackwell and Associates predates your marriage, and he's listed as sole proprietor. At this, I allowed myself a small smile. Is he? Imara's perfectly arched eyebrow rose slightly, the only indication of her surprise. She set down her tablet and leaned forward. Thalia, what have you done? I reached into my handbag and slid a folder across the table. 7 years ago, when Kieran was struggling to keep the firm afloat after the Nakamura case went south, I invested my entire trust fund, $7 million, into Blackwell and Associates. Kieran was so preoccupied with salvaging his reputation that he signed the investment agreement without reading the fine print. Imara opened the folder, her eyes widening slightly as she scanned the document. You own 60% of the firm. I do, I confirmed, feeling a strange calm. And Kieran has been transferring firm assets into a separate LLC for the past 18 months, an LLC registered solely in his name, with Meredith as the operating manager. Financial fraud, Imara murmured, the corner of her mouth lifting. Asset hiding, breach of fiduciary duty. Vanya has documented every transaction, I said. Every client he's redirected, every retainer that never made it to the firm's accounts. The next week passed in a blur of meetings with forensic accountants, late-night strategy sessions with Imara, and careful coordination with Rael, who was prepared to offer positions to any Blackwell associates who might want to jump ship once. The news broke. Through it all, I maintained radio silence with Kieran, who'd progressed from demanding text messages to sending his brother Niall to check on me at the hotel. I hadn't cried yet. Not a single tear. That worried me in some distant way, as though I should be more shattered, more broken by the collapse of my marriage. But each morning I woke with increasing clarity about how unhappy I'd been, how entirely I'd sublimated my own ambitions to fuel Kieran's. On the 8th day, I finally agreed to meet him. Not at our home. I refused to step foot in that house, until my name was the only one on the deed, but at Kavala, the upscale restaurant where we'd had our first date 10 years earlier. I arrived early, claiming the corner table with the best view of Elliott Bay, and watched him enter 15 minutes late. Kieran had always been striking, 6'2" with dark copper hair and the kind of confidence that commanded rooms. But, as he approached our table, I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. The practiced charm, the calculated smile, the assumptions of power and privilege that had shaped his every move. Thalia, he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I turned slightly, his lips brushing air. You've had your tantrum. It's time to come home. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit down, Kieran. We have the Abernathy dinner tonight. He continued as though I hadn't spoken, checking his watch. The Patek Philippe I'd given him last Christmas. Meredith has been fielding calls all week. The partners are asking questions. I'm sure they are, I said, opening my menu. How's the morning sickness? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's not what we're here to discuss, I finished for him. But it is, along with your embezzlement, your asset hiding, and the fact that I own controlling interest in the firm you've been systematically looting. The color drained from his face. To his credit, he didn't deny it immediately. Always the lawyer, assessing his position before responding. Those investments were for our future, Thalia. For expansion. Into Meredith's apartment in Belltown. Into the Cayman account under her grandfather's name. Into the vacation property in Whistler titled to your new LLC? I kept my voice low, my expression pleasant, as though we were discussing dinner selections. Anyone watching would see an attractive couple having a civil conversation. Only the whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the edge of the table betrayed his mounting panic. "You've been working with Vanya," he realized, eyes narrowing. "For how long?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Long enough," I said, signaling the waiter. "I'll have the salmon, please. He won't be staying." Kieran leaned forward, his voice dropping to that silky, persuasive tone he used in court. "Thal, be reasonable. Whatever Vanya found, I can't explain. We can work through this. The firm, our life together, it's worth saving." I studied him, this man I'd once loved enough to set aside my own ambitions. "The firm, perhaps," I agreed. "Our marriage? Not so much." "You're upset about Meredith. I understand that." "No," I cut him off. "I'm not upset about Meredith. I'm grateful to her, actually." This visibly startled him. "Grateful?" "She showed me what I already knew but wouldn't admit. You were never going to value what we built together. You were always going to take more than you gave." I placed my napkin in my lap. "You have two options, Kieran. Either we go to court, where I'll expose every fraudulent transfer, every client you've stolen, every ethical violation you've committed, or you sign over your remaining interest in the firm, along with our house, and walk away with what you've managed to squirrel away for yourself and your new family." His face darkened, that flash of temper I'd become so adept at managing over the years. "You'd destroy everything we've built? Over what? Wounded pride? Jealousy?" I smiled at him, genuinely amused. "You seem to be confusing me with yourself." The salmon arrived, perfectly seared with a lemon beurre blanc. I took a bite, savoring the delicate flavor. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Imara has the paperwork ready either way." "Imara Okafor? You hired Imara?" His voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. Kieran immediately modulated his tone, ever conscious of appearances. "That's a declaration of war, Thalia." "No," I corrected him. "That's me finally understanding the battle I've been fighting all along." I dabbed my lips with my napkin. "You should go. You wouldn't want to keep Meredith waiting in her condition." I watched him leave, his shoulders rigid with fury, and felt nothing but relief. The salmon turned to ash in my mouth, but I finished. Every bite. 7 years of keeping the peace, of swallowing my words and my wants. I was done with that now. Kieran chose option 1. Of course he did. Men like him always believe they can outmaneuver, outlitigate, outlast anyone who challenges them. The next morning, instead of signed paperwork, I received a notice that he'd filed for divorce, citing my unreasonable behavior and abandonment of the marital home. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so predictable. What followed was 6 months of legal warfare. Kieran hadn't anticipated the depth of my preparation, the meticulous documentation Vanya had compiled, or the loyalty I'd earned among the associates at the firm, many of whom came forward with their own evidence of his financial improprieties once they realized which way the wind was blowing. He hadn't expected Rael to orchestrate a mass exodus of our top-performing associates, or for 3 major clients to follow them based on their relationships with me rather than him. He certainly hadn't foreseen that I'd file a separate civil suit against him for breach of fiduciary duty, or that the Washington State Bar Association would open an investigation into his ethical violations. Through it all, I kept working. Not at the firm. I stayed away physically, operating through Imara and my own growing legal team, but on myself. I rented a small waterfront apartment in Kirkland, across the lake from our Medina mansion. I reconnected with law school friends I'd neglected while focusing on Kieran's career. I started running again, logging miles along the Burke-Gilman Trail at dawn while planning my strategy for the day ahead. The most surprising alliance came from Kieran's younger sister, Lyra, who appeared at my apartment one rainy October evening with a bottle of Macallan 25 and a flash drive. "He did the same thing to his first girlfriend in law school," she said, pouring us each 3 fingers of scotch. "Got her to drop out to support him, then left her for the editor of Law Review." She slid the flash drive across my kitchen counter. "Financial records from our family trust. He's been taking distributions in violation of the terms. Our father may be willing to overlook it, but I'm not." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, turning the small device over in my hand. Lyra's smile was sad. "Because you were the best thing that ever happened to him, and he was too arrogant to see it. And because Meredith just announced they're having twins. She deserves to know exactly who she's dealing with." By December, Kieran's position was crumbling. The Bar Association investigation had expanded, 3 clients had filed complaints about mishandled funds, and our divorce proceedings had revealed financial improprieties that threatened his very ability to practice law. He'd lost the swagger, the certainty that had once defined him. When his lawyer approached Imara about settlement talks, I knew we had him. We met at the Four Seasons, in a private conference room with views of Puget Sound. Outside, ferries crisscrossed the gunmetal water under heavy winter skies. Inside, Kieran sat flanked by his attorney and financial advisor, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. "My client is prepared to offer a generous settlement," his lawyer began, sliding a folder across the polished table. "Full ownership of the Medina. Property, a lump sum payment of $2 million and a clean break. No alimony, no ongoing financial entanglements." Imara didn't even open the folder. "And the firm?" "Mr. Blackwell retains ownership of Blackwell and Associates, of course, with agreement to rename the practice." I laughed then, the sound startling in the formal setting. "He can't offer what he doesn't own." Kieran's lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Dawson with thinning hair and expensive cufflinks, looked confused. "The firm predates the marriage. It's clearly separate property." "Except for my client's 60% ownership stake," Imara said smoothly, producing the investment agreement. "And the small matter of Mr. Blackwell's systematic looting of firm assets in violation of both this agreement and his fiduciary duty to the other partners." The color drained from Dawson's face as he scanned the document. "This can't be valid?" I supplied. "I assure you it is, as is the civil complaint we're prepared to file this afternoon if we don't reach an acceptable resolution here." Kieran finally spoke, his voice rough with fatigue or emotion. I couldn't tell which. "What do you want, Thalia?" What did I want? 6 months ago, I might have said revenge. 3 months ago, perhaps vindication. But sitting across from the husk of the man I'd once built my life around, I realized I wanted something much simpler. "I want what's mine," I said. "Full ownership of the firm, the Medina house, the vacation property in Whistler that you purchased with firm funds, and a public statement acknowledging that you're stepping down from the practice due to ethical violations." His face contorted. "You're trying to destroy me." "No, Kieran. You did that yourself." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm offering you a chance to walk away with your law license intact, if not your reputation. The Bar Association might be persuaded to accept a suspension rather than disbarment if we inform them you're cooperating fully." Dawson placed a restraining hand on Kieran's arm. "We need to confer privately." "Of course," I said, standing. "You have 1 hour. After that, we proceed with filing." Imara and I took the elevator down to the hotel restaurant, ordering coffee and watching the harbor. As we waited, "He'll take it," she said confidently. "He has no choice." "He might fight out of pure spite," I countered. Imara stirred her cappuccino thoughtfully. "Men like Kieran value survival above all. His ego is wounded, but his instinct for self-preservation is stronger." She was right. 53 minutes later, we were back in the conference room, watching Kieran sign away everything he'd built and everything he'd stolen in exchange for keeping his law license and avoiding criminal charges. As the lawyers finalized the paperwork, he looked up at me, something almost like respect in his eyes. "I didn't think you had it in you." "That was always your mistake," I replied. "You never really saw me at all." The most surprising emotion, once it was done, was emptiness. Not sadness or anger or even triumph, just a vast echoing space where my marriage had been, where my identity as Kieran's wife had lived for so long. I stood on the balcony of my Kirkland apartment that night, watching lights shimmer across the lake, and wondered who I would become now. The answer began to take shape the next morning, when I walked into the offices of what had been Blackwell & Associates, now simply Blackwell Law. The reception area fell silent as I passed, whispers following in my wake. In Kieran's corner office, my office now, I found Meredith clearing out her things, her pregnancy now visibly showing beneath a loose cashmere sweater. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders. "I never meant to hurt you." "And yet you did," I said, setting my briefcase on the desk. His desk, my desk. Life is full of unintended consequences. She placed a framed photo in her box, Kieran in skiing gear, his arm around her shoulders. "He said you were separated, that it was just a matter of paperwork." "And you believed him? Despite working here, seeing me every day, planning events with me for the firm?" Her cheeks flushed. "I wanted to believe him." I nodded, understanding that impulse better than she knew. "I'm keeping most of the staff, but restructuring the executive team. You should know the severance package is generous." Relief flickered across her face, followed quickly by wariness. "Why would you do that?" I considered her, young, ambitious, clearly intelligent enough to have caught Kieran's eye, but not experienced enough to recognize his patterns. "Because despite what he told you, I'm not your enemy. And because those babies deserve a secure start, regardless of their father's poor choices." She lifted her chin, one hand moving protectively to her abdomen. "We'll be fine. Kieran has family money." I smiled, not unkindly. "Ask him about that, and about his first girlfriend from law school. And perhaps consult your own attorney about establishing paternity and support agreements before the births." I moved toward the window, signaling our conversation was ending. Consider it free legal advice. After she left, I stood in the high center of the office that had been Kieran's sanctum for a decade. The space was aggressively masculine, all dark wood and leather, law books he never opened lining built-in shelves, fishing trophies from trips with clients mounted on the walls. By the end of the day, it would all be gone. The firm-wide meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Standing before the assembled staff, from senior partners to paralegals to the maintenance crew, I felt a momentary echo of the insecurity that had defined so much of my marriage. Then I looked out at the faces watching me expectantly, many of them women who had worked alongside me at firm events, who had witnessed my support of Kieran over the years, and I found my voice. "Many of you know me as Kieran Blackwell's wife," I began. "Today, I stand before you as Thalia Blackwell, majority owner and managing partner of Blackwell Law. As some of you are already aware, Kieran has chosen to step down from the firm due to ethical concerns currently under investigation by the Bar Association." Murmurs rippled through the gathered staff. I continued steadily. "The coming weeks will bring changes, some difficult, some long overdue. I can promise you 3 things: transparency in all our operations going forward, recognition based on merit rather than favoritism, and a workplace where ethical practice is valued above billable hours." I paused, surveying the room. "I understand some of you may choose to seek opportunities elsewhere. Those who stay will be part of building something better than what came before. By the end of the week, 12 staff members had resigned, including 2 senior partners who had been Kieran's closest allies. 23 chose to stay, among them some of our most talented associates who had previously been overlooked for advancement. The firm didn't collapse, as some had predicted. Instead, it transformed. We specialized in corporate accountability and whistleblower protection, areas I had always been drawn to and Kieran had dismissed as not profitable enough. We implemented flexible working policies that retained talented lawyers who needed to balance career and family. We established a foundation offering scholarships to law students from underrepresented backgrounds. 6 months after taking control of the firm, I sold the Medina Mansion and moved into a renovated loft in Pioneer Square, walking distance to our offices. The proceeds went into expanding the Scholarship Foundation and establishing a legal aid clinic for survivors of domestic abuse. I heard about Kieran occasionally. He'd taken a position with a smaller firm in Portland. The twins had been born. He was renting a modest house in a suburban neighborhood. Meredith had indeed taken my advice about consulting her own attorney, resulting in a support agreement that would secure the children's future, regardless of Kieran's fluctuating fortunes. A year to the day after the firm's 10-year reunion, the night that had changed everything, we hosted an event celebrating the relaunch of Blackwell Law. The same rooftop venue, the same spectacular view of the Seattle skyline and the Cascade Mountains beyond, but a different energy entirely. I stood at the podium, surveying the crowd. Our team, our clients, law school colleagues who had supported me through the transformation. The evening light caught my grandmother's emerald ring, now worn on my right hand rather than the left, where Kieran's diamond had once been. A year ago, I stood in this very spot and witnessed the end of one chapter of my life, I said. Tonight, we celebrate not just the success of our firm's new direction, but the power of reclaiming your own story. As applause rippled through the gathering, I caught sight of a familiar face near the back. Zara, the Lyft driver who had picked me up that fateful night. She was wearing the dark blue suit of our paralegal team, having accepted my offer of sponsorship through law school after I'd learned of her deferred dreams during subsequent rides. The measure of our success isn't found in billable hours or settlement figures, I continued. It's in the lives we change, including our own. I raised my glass. To new beginnings, hard-won wisdom, and the courage to walk away from what no longer serves you. As conversations flowed around me later that evening, Rael Chen appeared at my elbow, striking in a crimson sheath dress. "Impressive turnaround," she said, nodding toward a group of associates animatedly discussing a recent victory. "Though I'm still annoyed you stole the Westridge account from us," I laughed. "Consider it payment for poaching 3 of our associates last year." "Fair enough." She studied me over the rim of her champagne flute. "Are you happy, Thalia?" The question caught me off guard. In all the strategic planning, all the work of rebuilding, I hadn't stopped to consider the state of my own heart. But standing there, surrounded by the evidence of what I'd created from the ashes of betrayal, the answer came easily. "I'm free," I said, "and I'm just getting started." The Alexis Hotel became my sanctuary in those first disorienting weeks. I extended my stay indefinitely, grateful for the anonymity of luxury hospitality, the discreet staff who didn't question the woman who arrived with nothing but her evening gown and a clutch purse, who now received courier deliveries of documents, and held tense meetings in the hotel's private dining room. My first morning there, I'd ordered room service and sat cross-legged on the king-sized bed, methodically canceling joint credit cards and transferring funds from our shared accounts to the separate one I'd established years earlier. Not everything, I wasn't a thief, but enough to ensure I wouldn't be financially vulnerable while the legal battle unfolded. Kieran's initial strategy became clear within days. Freeze me out, pressure me through mutual friends, make me desperate. Enough to accept whatever settlement would let him keep the firm and his reputation intact. His lawyer filed emergency motions to freeze all our assets. His mother called with tearful pleas about working things out. His golf partner, who happened to be our financial advisor, suddenly couldn't access certain investment records I'd requested. What Kieran failed to understand was that desperation had been my teacher for longer than he knew. 3 years into our marriage, when he'd gone on a ski trip with clients and forgotten our anniversary, I'd felt the first real tremor of doubt, not just about his devotion, but about my own choices. I'd given up a promising legal career to support his, believing the bargain was temporary, that eventually there would be space for my ambitions too. That night, alone in our too-large house, I'd poured myself a glass of the Barolo we'd been saving and opened my laptop to look up my law school classmates. Riel Chen had just made partner at Wolcott & Jung. Devin Torres had argued his first case before the Ninth Circuit. Meanwhile, I was planning our firm's holiday party and editing Kieran's speeches. That night, something shifted inside me. A quiet, private rebellion. The next morning, I'd begun the process of reinstating my law license, telling no one, not even Kieran, who never noticed the study materials I kept in my car, or the online exam prep sessions I scheduled during his regular Thursday night basketball games. Now, as I sat in Imara's office reviewing our strategy, that secret preparation was paying off. Kieran's trying to position this as you being an uninvolved spouse who suddenly wants half of his hard-earned assets, Imara said, passing me the latest filing from his legal team. He's claiming you were never involved in the firm beyond social appearances. I skimmed the document, my anger rising with each paragraph of revisionist history. I wrote his briefs for the Nakamura case when he was too overwhelmed to meet the deadline. I researched precedents for the Porter settlement. I personally managed client relationships when he was too busy chasing new business to maintain them. Can you prove it? Imara asked, direct as always. I nodded. I kept copies of everything, and several associates witnessed my contributions. Will they testify to that? Against the founding partner who controls their careers? That was the heart of it. Who would risk their professional future to support my claims? Kieran's power within the legal community was formidable. He sat on bar association committees, golfed with judges, had connections throughout the Pacific. Northwest legal world. I had... what? A network of caterers and event planners? Charity committee members? The society wives who'd always viewed me with a mixture of pity and envy? That night in my hotel room, I created a spreadsheet of everyone I'd worked with during my 7 years supporting Blackwell & Associates. Not just the lawyers and paralegals, but the administrative staff, the IT department, the janitorial team. Beside each name, I noted every interaction, every potential moment when they might have witnessed my contributions. By dawn, I had identified 17 people who had directly observed me performing substantive legal work for the firm. The question was whether any of them would acknowledge it. My first meeting was with Zurian Kosi, the firm's head paralegal. We met at a small Ethiopian restaurant far from the legal district, where Kieran's allies wouldn't accidentally spot us. Zuri arrived precisely on time, her elegant braids swept into an updo, her expression carefully neutral. Thank you for agreeing to see me, I said after we'd ordered. Zuri adjusted her glasses. I'm not sure what you expect from this meeting, Mrs. Blackwell. Ms. I corrected gently. And I expect nothing. I simply want to understand what's happening at the firm since my departure. She studied me, caution in her dark eyes. Mr. Blackwell has instructed all staff not to discuss firm matters with outside parties. Am I an outside party? After 7 years? Something flickered across her face. According to the all-staff email, yes. I nodded, sipping my tea. Interesting. Has he also instructed staff about the financial irregularities? About the client funds being redirected to his personal LLC? Zuri's fingers tightened around her water glass, but her expression remained neutral. I wouldn't know about that, Wouldn't you? As head paralegal who processes all client billing? Our food arrived, saving her from responding immediately. We ate in silence for a few moments before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 associates have resigned in the past week. There are rumors about an ethics investigation. I kept my expression calm, though inside I felt a flicker of vindication. That must be creating quite a workload for those who remain. Meredith has hired temps, she said. Law students from Seattle U. They don't have the clearance for sensitive client materials, so the rest of us are working double shifts. She hesitated, then added, Mr. Blackwell hasn't been in the office much. Meredith says he's meeting with potential investors. Investors? This was news. The firm has never had outside investors. Zuri shrugged slightly. That's just what we've been told. By the time our coffee arrived, Zuri had shared, without directly saying so, that the firm was in turmoil. Associates were updating their resumes, paralegals were documenting everything to protect themselves, and clients were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about their retainers. Kieran's public story about an amicable separation was crumbling under the weight of reality. I should get back, Zuri said, reaching for her purse. My lunch hour is almost over. I placed my hand briefly on hers. Thank you for the conversation. She met my eyes directly for the first time. Ms. Blackwell. The morning after the reunion, when you didn't come in, Mr. Blackwell had IT clear your office. Personal items, files, everything, boxed up and moved to storage. I thought you should know. My stomach tightened. What? Storage facility? Meredith handled it. But. She hesitated, then drew a business card from her wallet and slid it across the table. On the back was a handwritten address. That afternoon, I took a lift to the storage facility in South Seattle. The manager, a burly man named Fletcher with tattoos covering both arms, initially refused to allow access without the account holder's permission. The account is under Blackwell and Associates, I explained calmly. I'm Thalia Blackwell. Name? On the paperwork is Kieran Blackwell, he said, checking his computer. I removed my driver's license and placed it on the counter beside the investment agreement, showing my ownership stake in the firm. Blackwell and Associates is my company. Those are my personal possessions, unless you'd prefer I come back with the sheriff and a court order. Fletcher studied the documents, then my face, then shrugged. Unit 3 at 17, down the hall, left at the water fountain, 3rd corridor. The storage unit was small, barely 8 by 10 feet, stacked with banker's boxes labeled in Meredith's precise handwriting. TB personal items, TB office decor, TB miscellaneous. As I opened the first box, anger surged through me. My grandmother's hand-painted bowl that had sat on my desk, filled with paper clips. Photo frames of my nieces and nephews. Books I'd referenced regularly in my unofficial legal work for the firm. But it was the 3rd box that made my hands shake. Labeled simply TB Files, it contained folders of my notes on cases, drafts of briefs I'd edited for Kieran, research I'd compiled on precedents and statutes. Evidence of my contributions that Kieran had removed from the office. Evidence that proved I wasn't just the founder's wife, but an active, if unacknowledged, legal mind in the firm. I called Imara immediately. I need a forensic documentation team at a storage unit in South Seattle. Now. 2 hours later, every item had been photographed in situ, cataloged, and carefully packed for transport to Imara's offices. The files would be reviewed by her team for any documentation that might support my claim to the firm. That night, alone in my hotel room, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the marriage, that grief would come later, but for the years of invisibility, of having my contributions minimized and my ambitions shelved. I cried for the younger Thalia who had believed that supporting someone else's dreams would eventually create space for her own. When the tears subsided, I did what lawyers do best. I began to build my case. Methodically, meticulously, I documented every contribution I'd made to Blackwell and Associates over 7 years. Every brief I'd researched, every client I'd soothed, every strategic decision where my input had shaped the outcome. By morning, I had a 27-page chronology of my unacknowledged work for the firm. The next day brought unexpected support from a surprising quarter. Danica Reeves, a senior associate who had always been firmly in Kieran's camp, texted me requesting a meeting. We arranged to meet at the Seattle Art Museum, among the crowds viewing a new exhibition of Japanese woodblock prints. "I can't stay long," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder as we stood before Hokusai's great wave. "If Kieran knew I was talking to you, why are you?" I asked directly. Danica exhaled slowly. "Because what's happening at the firm isn't right. Kieran's been moving clients to a new entity, premium clients, the ones with the biggest retainers. He's telling them it's a restructuring for tax purposes, but the new engagement letters don't include most of the associates who've been working their cases." My pulse quickened. "Do you have copies of these new engagement letters?" She shook her head. "Meredith handles all that now, but last week I was copied on an email chain accidentally. Kieran's new LLC, Blackwell Strategies, is entering into an of-counsel relationship with Hamilton Frost in Portland. Hamilton Frost, one of the largest corporate firms in the Pacific Northwest. If Kieran was setting up an alliance with them, he was planning his exit strategy from our firm while stripping it of its most valuable assets. Danica, would you be willing to document what you've observed, formally?" She paled slightly. "I can't afford to be blackballed. I have student loans, a mortgage." "I understand," I said, and I did. Kieran's influence could make or break a young lawyer's career. But if things continue as they are, there might not be a firm left for any of us. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the intricate details of Hokusai's wave. "I'll think about it. That's all I can promise right now." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. As Danica hurried away, I remained before the painting, struck by its imagery, a towering wave about to crash down on vulnerable boats beneath. That's what Kieran was to the firm now. Not its foundation, but a destructive force threatening to drown everyone who had trusted him. Back at the hotel, I found an elegantly wrapped package waiting for me at the front desk. Inside was a vintage Hermes scarf in shades of blue and gold, with a note in familiar handwriting. "For your new beginning. L.B. Lyra Blackwell. Kieran's sister, 8 years his junior and the family rebel who had eschewed law school for a career in sustainable fashion design. We'd been close during my early years with Kieran, before his disapproval of her impractical career choices had created distance between them. I hadn't spoken to her since last Christmas, when she'd arrived at family dinner with a new girlfriend, and Kieran had made thinly veiled disapproving comments throughout the meal. I called her immediately. "The scarf is beautiful. Thank you." "Thalia." Her warm voice brought a smile to my face. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected, worse than I'd like," I admitted. "How much do you know?" "That my brother is a cheating bastard who got his assistant pregnant while married to the best thing that ever happened to him?" That much I gathered from Mother's hysterical phone calls. I laughed, despite myself. "And how is the illustrious Mrs. Blackwell Sr. taking the scandal?" "Directing her social secretary to cancel all engagements for the foreseeable future and increasing her tennis lessons to daily. She's waiting for you to come to your senses and reconcile for the sake of the family name." "Not happening," I said firmly. "Good." Lyra's tone was fierce. "He doesn't deserve forgiveness, Thalia, and you deserve better than what he's given." "Ew." "I'm fighting for the firm," I told her. "Did you know I own 60%? Her delighted laughter warmed me. "No. Oh, that's perfect. Kieran must be losing his mind. He's trying to strip its assets before I can enforce my ownership rights." She was quiet for a moment. "You need allies. people with influence in the legal community who will stand with you against him. They're in short supply. Kieran has spent years cultivating relationships with everyone who matters. Not everyone, Lyra said thoughtfully. What about Justice Matsuda? You two became close when you chaired the Women's Legal Aid fundraiser last year. Justice Elena Matsuda. Recently appointed to the Washington Supreme Court, she had indeed become a friend during the months we'd worked together on the fundraising gala. I'd spent hours helping her refine her keynote address, offering suggestions that bridged her legal brilliance with the emotional impact needed for a fundraising audience. I can't drag her into this, I protested. She's too newly appointed. The politics would be— At least talk to her, Lyra interrupted. If nothing else, she might have insights about navigating the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Didn't she chair it before her appointment? The next afternoon found me having tea with Justice Matsuda in the quiet corner of a bookstore cafe near the courthouse. At 62, Elena Matsuda carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had broken barriers her entire career, one of the first Asian American women to serve on Washington's highest court, and before that, a trailblazing civil rights attorney. Talia, she said warmly, embracing me. I've been concerned about you since I heard the news. I smiled ruefully. Which version did you hear? Several, she admitted, stirring honey into her green tea. But I've learned over the years to reserve judgment until I hear directly from the source. Over the next hour, I laid out the situation: my marriage's collapse, my ownership stake in the firm, Kieran's attempts to undermine that ownership by transferring assets and clients. I was careful not to ask directly for help. Justice Matsuda's position demanded scrupulous neutrality. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. The legal community in Seattle is small, she finally said. Reputations matter. So does behavior during times of personal crisis. Kieran's reputation is formidable, I acknowledged. Yes, but reputations can change quickly when certain lines are crossed. She met my eyes directly. The Ethics Committee takes financial improprieties very seriously, especially when client funds are involved. My pulse quickened. I have evidence suggesting mishandling of client retainers. She nodded once, her expression neutral. The current Ethics Committee chair is Judge Raymond Okoye. We served together in the U.S. Attorney's Office 20 years ago. He's a man of absolute integrity. It wasn't direct advice, but the message was clear enough. If I had evidence of ethical violations, there were proper channels and specific individuals who would ensure it was taken seriously. Thank you, I said simply. Elena smiled. For what? We're just two friends having tea. She reached into her bag and withdrew. A business card, writing something on the back before sliding it across the table. My new personal email. The official one is monitored by my clerks. As our meeting concluded, she added casually, I'm speaking at the Women in Law Symposium next month. I do hope you'll attend, regardless of current circumstances. Your voice in those discussions has always been valuable. It was an important public signal that despite whatever Kieran might be saying about me in legal circles, Justice Matsuda still considered me a respected member of the community. That evening, I moved out of the Alexis Hotel. As supportive as the staff had been, the mounting expenses were unsustainable for what might become a prolonged legal battle. Lyra offered her guest room, but her apartment in Capitol Hill, while charming, was too small for two people, plus her design studio. Instead, I found a furnished month-to-month rental in Belltown, a modest one-bedroom with views of Elliott Bay and enough space to set up a makeshift office. The move felt symbolic, my first real step away from the luxury that had defined my life with Kieran. The apartment was clean and comfortable, but nothing like the sprawling Medina mansion with its private dock and wine cellar. As I unpacked, my few possessions, clothes, toiletries, the files from the storage unit, my laptop, I was struck by how little I truly needed. That night, I sat on the small balcony watching ferries cross the darkened sound, their lights making slow, deliberate patterns across the water. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should know Kay met with Hamilton Frost Partners again today. Moving fast. D." Danica, keeping me informed despite her fears. I typed back a simple thank you, and then called Imara. "He's accelerating his plan," I told her without preamble. "We need to move faster." "Agreed," she said. "I've reviewed the files from the storage unit. We have enough to file for an emergency injunction preventing any transfer of firm assets or clients pending resolution of ownership claims." "Do it," I said. "First thing tomorrow." "It will escalate things significantly," she warned. "Once we file, there's no going back to quiet negotiation." I watched another ferry begin its journey across the dark water, steady and unwavering despite the currents beneath. I'm not interested in quiet negotiation. I want what's mine. The next morning, Imara filed the injunction request. By noon, it had been granted by Judge Wilson, a no-nonsense jurist known for her strict interpretation of fiduciary duties. By 2 o'clock, Kieran's lawyer had called Imara's office, demanding an emergency settlement conference. By 4, I was sitting in Imara's conference room across from Kieran and his legal team, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Kieran looked both angry and bewildered, as though he couldn't quite believe I was capable of outmaneuvering him. "This is unnecessary," he began, his tone conciliatory, but his eyes cold. "We can resolve this between ourselves, Thalia. We were partners for 7 years." "Business partners?" I asked innocently. "Because that's what we're discussing today, business." His jaw tightened. "You know what I mean." "Actually, I don't," I countered. "Because partners, business or marital, don't steal from each other. They don't hide assets or redirect client funds." "Those are serious allegations," his lawyer interjected smoothly. "Without foundation." Imara slid a folder across the table. Judge Wilson disagreed, hence the injunction. As Kieran's lawyer reviewed the document, I studied my husband's face. The man I'd married had been brilliant, ambitious, charming, arrogant. Yes, but with the talent to back it up. The man before me now seemed diminished somehow, cornered and calculating. "What do you want, Thalia?" he asked finally. "Just tell me your price." "I want what I own," I said simply. 60% of Blackwell and Associates, the house that my grandmother's trust helped pay for, and a full accounting of all client funds transferred to Blackwell Strategies LLC in the past 18 months. His face darkened. "You're trying to destroy everything I've built." "No, Kieran. Everything we built. The difference matters." His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear. Kieran shook his head once, sharply, then stood. "This meeting is premature. We need time to review your claims and prepare a proper response." "The court gave you 48 hours to provide a full accounting of all firm assets and client accounts," Imara reminded him. "That clock is ticking." As they gathered their papers to leave, I remained seated, calm in the face of Kieran's barely controlled fury. At the door, he turned back. "You won't win this, Thalia. You're out of your depth." After they left, Imara expelled a long breath. "That went better than expected." I raised an eyebrow. "Did it?" "He's scared," she confirmed. "Men like Kieran lash out when they're cornered, and make mistakes." That night, as I prepared a simple dinner in my rental apartment's compact kitchen, my phone rang with Kieran's number. I declined the call. It rang again immediately. And again. On the 4th attempt, I answered, placing it on speaker as I continued, chopping vegetables. "What part of communicate through our attorneys was unclear?" I asked. "Thalia, be reasonable." Kieran's voice was tense. "You're putting everything at risk with these wild accusations. The firm's reputation, our clients' confidence. Our clients? I repeated. The ones you've been redirecting to your new LLC? That was a contingency plan, he said quickly. Just in case things didn't work out between us. I was protecting the practice. I set down my knife. No, Kieran, you were protecting yourself, at the expense of the firm and everyone who works there. Look, his tone shifted, becoming the persuasive one he used with reluctant witnesses. What if we restructure the ownership? You keep the house, I'll transfer 30% of the firm to you formally. I already own 60, I reminded him. On paper, he countered. But who built the client relationships? Who brings in the business? Who actually runs the firm? Day to day? And there it was, the fundamental belief that had shaped our entire relationship. That his contributions were essential while mine were auxiliary. That his work mattered while mine was merely supportive. I'm not negotiating outside of formal channels, I said firmly. If you have a settlement proposal, have your attorney present it to Imara. Damn it, Thalia. His control finally slipped. You're being vindictive. This isn't about the firm. It's about Meredith. I laughed then, genuinely amused. You think I'm fighting for a multi-million-dollar law practice because my feelings are hurt? This isn't about Meredith, Kieran. It's about what's mine. It was never yours, he snapped. You were the wife, not the lawyer. You were the hostess, not the partner. Don't delude yourself into thinking. I ended the call mid-sentence, my hand perfectly steady. His words, cruel as they were, merely confirmed what I'd always suspected he believed. What hurt wasn't the revelation, but the years I'd spent accepting that diminished role, believing that supporting his ambitions was enough. The vegetables abandoned, I poured myself a glass of wine and returned to the balcony. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Somewhere across the water, in our Medina mansion, Kieran was probably raging to Meredith about my unreasonableness, my delusions, my betrayal. The thought didn't disturb me as it once might have. My phone buzzed with an email notification from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read simply, "Documentation you requested." The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the message contained only a link to a secure file-sharing service. Inside were dozens of documents, client engagement letters, billing records, bank statements, all showing the systematic transfer of Blackwell & Associates' most valuable clients to Kieran's separate LLC over the past year. The email signature provided the missing context. Harlow Quinn, former accounting manager, Blackwell & Associates. Harlow. I remembered her now, a quiet, meticulous woman who had left the firm abruptly 3 months ago. At the time, Kieran had said she'd received a better offer elsewhere. Now I wondered what she had discovered that had prompted her departure, and why she was providing evidence now. I forwarded the email to Imara with a simple message. We have what we need. Morning after receiving Harlow's evidence, I woke before dawn, my mind already racing with strategies. The documentation she'd provided was devastating, proof not just of Kieran's deception, but of potential criminal liability. Client funds held in trust had been temporarily reallocated according to internal memos. Retainer fees had been directed to accounts outside the firm's official books. If the Bar Association or the SEC investigated, Kieran could face more than divorce proceedings. He could lose his license or even face charges. I sat at my small kitchen counter, sipping coffee, and watching the sky lighten over the sound, weighing the implications of what I now possessed. Using this evidence meant escalating beyond a private dispute between estranged spouses. It meant potential professional ruin for the father of Meredith's unborn child. The question wasn't whether I could destroy Kieran, but whether I wanted. My phone chimed with a text from Imara. Meeting with Judge Wilson, 9 a.m. Wear something powerful. 3 hours later, I sat beside Imara in Judge Eleanor Wilson's chambers, wearing a charcoal suit with subtle emerald accents. My battle. Armor. Across from us, Kieran and his attorney looked distinctly uncomfortable. Judge Wilson, a formidable woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and penetrating eyes, reviewed the documents before her in silence. These are serious allegations. Ms. Okafor, she said finally, looking up at Imara. If accurate, they extend beyond civil matters into potential ethical violations. We're aware, Your Honor, Imara replied. My client's primary concern is preserving the integrity of the firm during divorce proceedings. Judge Wilson turned her gaze to me. Ms. Blackwell, you own 60% of Blackwell and Associates according to these documents? Yes, Your Honor. And you were not aware of these financial transfers until recently? I was not, I confirmed. While I was involved in the firm's operations, I was not privy to accounting decisions. She nodded once, then turned to Kieran's attorney. Mr. Dawson, what is your client's response to these allegations? Dawson cleared his throat. Your Honor, Mr. Blackwell categorically denies any impropriety. The transfers in question were standard operating procedure for a firm expanding its practice areas. As for ownership stake, we contest the validity of the investment agreement, which was signed under unusual circumstances. Judge Wilson's eyebrow arched slightly. Unusual how? My client was under extreme pressure during a difficult case. Ms. Blackwell took advantage of that vulnerability to secure an ownership interest disproportionate to her actual contribution to the firm. I felt a surge of anger but kept my expression neutral. Beside me, Imara shifted almost imperceptibly, a signal to remain calm. Judge Wilson studied Kieran for a long moment. Mr. Blackwell, you're claiming you didn't understand what you were signing when you accepted Ms. Blackwell's investment of nearly $2 million? Kieran straightened, adopting the confident posture I'd seen countless times in court. Not exactly, Your Honor. I understood we were using family funds to support the firm during a temporary cash flow issue. I did not understand I was signing over controlling interest in a practice I had built from the ground up. I see. Judge Wilson's tone was neutral, but something in her eyes suggested skepticism. And the client funds redirected to Blackwell Strategies LLC? Kieran's confident expression faltered slightly. Those were advanced deposits on a new practice area we were developing, all properly documented and disclosed to the clients in question. We would request immediate production of those client disclosures, Imara interjected smoothly. Judge Wilson nodded. Indeed. She closed the folder before her. Here's what's going to happen. I'm extending the temporary injunction freezing all assets of both Blackwell and Associates and Blackwell Strategies LLC for 30 days. During that time, a court-appointed forensic accountant will review all financial records of both entities. Mr. Blackwell will produce all client disclosures regarding fund transfers within 48 hours. And Ms. Blackwell, she turned to me, will produce any documentation supporting her claim of active participation in the firm's legal work. Yes, Your Honor, I said. One more thing. Judge Wilson's gaze swept over all of us. If I find evidence of ethical violations or mishandling of client funds, I will have no choice but to refer this matter to the Bar Association. I suggest all parties consider carefully how they wish to proceed. As we left the courthouse, Kieran caught up to me at the marble steps. You've crossed a line, Thalia, he said, his voice low and tense. These accusations are supported by evidence, I finished for him. Evidence that could end my career, he hissed. Is that what you want? To destroy everything? I stopped, turning to face him fully. What I want, Kieran, is what I earned, what I built alongside you, what you tried to take from me. You're making a mistake, he warned. I still have friends in this town. Powerful ones. So do I replied. The difference is, mine know exactly who I am. As he stalked away, Imara rejoined me. That went better than expected, she observed. Judge Wilson sees through him. What happens now? I asked as we descended the courthouse steps. Now we prepare for war, Imara said simply, and you need to decide how far you're willing to go. That question haunted me through the following weeks as the court-appointed accountant combed through financial records and Kieran's team scrambled to produce client disclosures that likely didn't exist. I threw myself into gathering evidence of my contributions to the firm. Emails, drafts, notes from meetings where I'd provided legal insights despite my unofficial role. Unexpected support came from Yvette Cheng, Kieran's former administrative assistant before Meredith. Now retired, Yvette had no stake in the outcome beyond her sense of justice. She arrived at my apartment one rainy afternoon with a cardboard box of notebooks. "I kept everything," she said, setting the box on my counter. "Force of habit from 40 years as a legal secretary. These are all the notes from meetings where you provided input on cases, dates, times, who was present, what was discussed." I stared at the neat stack of notebooks, each labeled by year. "Yvette, this is the truth," she finished simply. "Mr. Blackwell relied on your legal expertise much more than he ever acknowledged. Anyone who worked closely with him knew that." Yvette's meticulous records provided a timeline of my involvement that even Kieran couldn't dispute. Her testimony, that of a respected, long-term employee with no financial interest in the outcome, would be devastating to his claim that I was merely a supportive spouse with no substantive role in the firm. As the deadline for the accountant's report approached, settlement offers began arriving from Kieran's lawyers, each one more generous than the last, but all requiring me to relinquish my claim to the firm, 40% ownership and the Medina house. Then 50% ownership in the house, plus a cash payment. Finally, 55% ownership, the house, cash, and a non-disclosure agreement about the financial irregularities. "He's desperate," Imara observed as we reviewed the latest offer. "The accountant must have found something significant." I tapped my pen against the document. "Not desperate enough. He's still trying to maintain control." "What is your endgame here, Thalia?" Imara asked. "Do you actually want to run Blackwell and Associates? Practice law again after all these years?" The question caught me off guard. In the intensity of the legal battle, I hadn't fully considered what victory would look like beyond securing what was rightfully mine. Did I want to step into Kieran's role? Rebuild a firm potentially tainted by his actions? Return to a profession I'd set aside 7 years ago? "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I want the choice to be mine." The next day, the forensic accountant's report landed like a bomb in Judge Wilson's chambers. Kieran had indeed been systematically diverting client funds, retainers, and firm assets to his separate LLC for over 18 months. The total exceeded $3 million. Money that rightfully belonged to Blackwell and Associates, and, by extension, primarily to me as majority owner. Judge Wilson's expression was grave as she reviewed the findings. "Mr. Dawson, does your client wish to respond to these conclusions?" Kieran's attorney looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, my client maintains these transfers were part of a restructuring strategy that was unfortunately interrupted by personal circumstances." "Personal circumstances," Judge Wilson repeated flatly. "You mean his divorce after impregnating his executive assistant?" Dawson winced slightly. The timing was unfortunate. "Indeed." Judge Wilson closed the report. "I am extending the asset freeze indefinitely. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Blackwell to immediately return all diverted funds to Blackwell and Associates' proper accounts. Failure to comply within 7 days will result in contempt charges." She turned to me. "Ms. Blackwell, the court recognizes your 60% ownership stake in the firm. As majority owner, you have the right to make operational decisions, including management changes, subject to proper corporate governance." It was a complete victory, more decisive than even Imara had anticipated. As we left the courtroom, reporters clustered on the steps, alerted to the high-profile dispute. Imara fielded questions with practiced ease while I maintained a dignified silence, aware that every expression, every word would be scrutinized by the legal community. Once safely in Imara's car, I finally allowed myself to exhale. "It's really over?" "The ownership dispute, yes," Imara confirmed. "The divorce proceedings will continue, but with the firm's status resolved, the rest is relatively straightforward." "And the ethical violations? The Bar Association?" Imara glanced at me. "That depends on you. Judge Wilson will make a referral." "Unless both parties reach an agreement that satisfies her concerns about client protection." That evening, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The skyline glittered before me, the Space Needle illuminated. Against the night sky, somewhere in that cityscape was the office that now legally belonged primarily to me, the firm that bore my name not just through marriage, but through legal right. My phone rang, Lyra's number. "Congratulations, majority owner," she said when I answered. "The legal community is buzzing. Kieran's been summoned to an emergency meeting with the Bar Association Ethics Committee." "How do you know that?" I asked, surprised. "My girlfriend's brother is a paralegal there," she explained. "Not official yet, but word travels fast. He's in serious trouble, Thalia." I sighed, conflicted. That wasn't my intention. "Wasn't it?" Lyra challenged gently. "You went after the firm knowing what he'd been doing with client funds." "I went after what was mine," I corrected. "The consequences of his actions are his responsibility, not mine." "Fair enough," she conceded. "So what now? Are you going to take his corner office? Rename the firm?" The questions echoed Imara's "from the day before." What did I actually want now that I had the power to choose? "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But for the first time in years, the decision is entirely mine." The following week, I walked into Blackwell & Associates for the first time since the reunion that had shattered my world. The reception area fell silent as I passed, whispers following in my wake. Meredith was mercifully absent. On maternity leave already, I'd heard. Kieran's office door was closed, but I knew he wasn't inside. According to Imara, he'd been advised by his attorney to work remotely while the ownership transition occurred. Zuri met me by the conference room, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes warm. "Ms. Blackwell, the senior associates are assembled as requested." "Thank you, Zuri," I said, smoothing my jacket. Emerald silk today, a deliberate departure from the conservative grays and navies that had dominated my supportive spouse wardrobe. "And please, it's Thalia." 8 senior associates waited. Inside, their expressions ranging from wary to openly curious. Several had testified about my contributions to the firm during the court proceedings. Others had remained strategically neutral. All now understood that their professional futures rested significantly in my hands. "Thank you for meeting with me," I began, taking the seat at the head of the table that had always been Kieran's. "I know the past few months have created uncertainty for everyone." Danica Reeves, who had risked her career to provide information about Kieran's client transfers, spoke first. "We appreciate your willingness to meet with us. There are concerns about the firm's direction." I nodded. "Understandably. Let me be clear about several things. First, all client funds that were improperly transferred have been returned to their appropriate accounts. Second, no associate will be penalized for their position or lack of position during recent events. And third," I paused, meeting each person's gaze in turn, "this firm will continue, though with some significant changes." Over the next hour, I outlined my vision. A restructuring of the partnership track to create more transparency and opportunity. A comprehensive review of all client relationships to ensure proper handling. New practice areas that aligned with my own legal interests rather than just Kieran's. and a name change that would signal our new direction while honoring the firm's established reputation. Blackwell Legal, I proposed. Simple, direct, and reflecting both continuity and change. By the meeting's end, the tension in the room had noticeably eased. Several associates lingered afterward, offering tentative support for the changes I'd outlined. Danica approached last, waiting until we were alone in the conference room. "I took a significant risk," she said quietly, "supporting your claim against Kieran." "You did," I acknowledged. "One I won't forget." She studied me for a moment. "Why did you fight so hard for the firm? You could have taken the house, a settlement, walked away clean." The question deserved an honest answer. Because for 7 years, I poured my intelligence, my creativity, my legal mind into this place without recognition. Because Kieran built his success on my contributions while treating me as an accessory. And because, I added with a small smile, I'm actually a very good lawyer. Danica smiled back, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. "I know. I've read your edits on my briefs, always better than Kieran's." After the meeting, I toured the office spaces, reintroducing myself to staff who had known me only as Kieran's wife for years. In the records room, I found Zuri organizing files, her methodical nature evident in the precise stacks surrounding her. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked. "About the financial irregularities." She looked up, her expression guarded. I had suspicions, nothing concrete until Harlow started asking questions. "And after she left?" Zuri sighed, setting down the folder, in her hands. "Meredith took over the billing oversight. Access to financial records became more restricted. By then, I was just trying to protect the paralegals under my supervision." I nodded, understanding. "Things will be different now, more transparent." "Will they?" she challenged gently. "You're not Kieran, but power changes people. I've seen it before." Her candor was refreshing after months of careful political maneuvering. "Then I'll need people around me who aren't afraid to say when they see it changing me." Zuri studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "I can do that." In the following weeks, I divided my time between the firm and continuing legal education courses, refreshing my knowledge of current statutes and precedents. My law license had remained active, but my practical skills needed updating before I could step fully into the role of practicing attorney again. The divorce proceedings continued in parallel, though with the firm's ownership resolved, the remaining issues were relatively straightforward. The Medina house would be sold, the proceeds divided. Our investment accounts would be split according to contribution. Kieran would keep his new LLC, though with its major assets returned to Blackwell Legal, its value was significantly diminished. 3 months after Judge Wilson's ruling, I received an unexpected call from Kieran's attorney requesting a private meeting. Not to discuss the divorce, but to propose a resolution to the pending ethics investigation. We met at a neutral location, a private dining room at Canlis with views of Lake Union. Dawson arrived alone, which surprised me. Mr. Blackwell thought it best if I presented this proposal without his presence, he explained, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. He understands that his emotions might complicate matters. Inside was a formal letter on Dawson's firm letterhead, outlining a proposed agreement. Kieran would accept a 1-year suspension of his law license and make full restitution to any affected clients. In exchange, I would provide a statement to the Bar Association indicating that the financial irregularities had been addressed to my satisfaction as majority owner of the firm. "He's asking me to help salvage his career," I summarized, setting the letter down. "After everything." Dawson nodded, his expression carefully neutral. He recognizes the position he's put himself in. A formal ethics investigation could result in disbarment, with a child on the way. I thought of Meredith, now heavily pregnant, and the innocent life that would soon depend on Kieran. My Anger toward him remained, but punishing his child for his failings served no purpose. "I'll consider it," I said finally, "but I need something in return beyond what's outlined here." "What would that be?" "A public statement from Kieran acknowledging my contributions to the firm over the years. Not a generic press release, a specific recognition of my legal work, my client development, my strategic input." Dawson looked surprised. "That's an unusual request in this context." "It's non-negotiable," I replied calmly. "My reputation in the legal community has been undermined by years of being positioned as merely supportive rather than substantively contributing. That ends now." The attorney studied me with newfound respect. "I'll convey your terms." 2 days later, Kieran agreed to my conditions. 1 week after that, he issued a statement to the Seattle legal community acknowledging my significant legal contributions to the firm's success and my instrumental role in developing key client relationships and case strategies. The statement was circulated to all major law firms in the region, the local bar association, and legal publications. The ethics matter resolved with a 1-year suspension rather than disbarment. Kieran relocated to Portland as planned, accepting a position with Hamilton Frost that would begin after his suspension ended. Meredith went with him, giving birth to twin girls shortly after they settled into a modest house in a suburban neighborhood. A far cry from the Medina mansion, but a fresh start for their new family. As for me, I sold the mansion, using part of the proceeds to purchase a condominium in Pioneer Square. Walking distance to the firm and immersed in the vibrant energy of downtown Seattle. The rest I invested in expanding Blackwell Legal, recruiting talented young attorneys who were drawn to our newly established focus on corporate accountability and whistleblower protection. 6 months after taking control, I argued my first case in over 7 years, a whistleblower protection matter representing a financial analyst who had exposed fraudulent accounting at a major tech firm. The courtroom felt at once foreign and deeply familiar, like returning to a childhood home. As I presented our opening arguments, I was aware of whispers among the gallery, curiosity about the woman who had transformed from society wife to formidable litigator. We won that case, securing not just compensation for our client, but significant punitive damages against the company that had attempted to silence him. The victory established Blackwell Legal as a serious player in corporate accountability, a firm willing to take on powerful interests and win. That evening, I invited the legal team to celebrate at a local wine bar. As glasses were raised in toast, Danica, now my second in command, leaned close. Judge Patterson asked me an interesting question after the verdict. "Oh," I sipped, my champagne still riding the high of our win. "She wanted to know if you'd consider applying for the judicial vacancy on the Superior Court. Apparently your name's being mentioned in influential circles." The suggestion startled me. A judgeship had never been part of my ambitions, yet the idea held immediate appeal. The opportunity to shape legal precedent, to ensure fairness in a system often tilted toward the powerful. "I just reclaimed my place as a practicing attorney," I reminded her. "I'm not ready to set that aside." Danica smiled. "Just passing along the message. Though for what it's worth, you'd make an excellent judge. You understand both sides of power now." Later that night, alone in my condo with its views of Elliott Bay, I reflected on how thoroughly my life had transformed in less than a year. From supportive spouse to independent attorney, from silenced contributor to recognized expert, from someone whose value was defined by her relationship to another, to a woman standing entirely on her own merits. My phone chimed with a text from Lyra. "Saw the news about your win. Kieran must be seething. Dinner this weekend to celebrate?" I smiled, typing back, "Absolutely. And let's not waste time talking about Kieran. I'm more interested in the future than the past." And I meant it. The anger that had fueled my initial fight for the firm had gradually transformed into something more sustainable, determination to build something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. The victory wasn't just winning control of Blackwell Legal or even restoring my professional reputation. It was rediscovering the woman I had been before, sublimating my ambitions to Kieran's, and then discovering an even stronger version of her I hadn't known existed. A week later, Justice Matsuda invited me to lunch at her favorite sushi restaurant near the courthouse. As we settled into a quiet corner booth, she studied me with evident approval. "The Westridge whistleblower case was excellently argued," she said. "Your command of the courtroom was impressive for someone who's been away from practice." "Thank you," I said, genuinely pleased by her assessment. It felt right, being back in court. She nodded, selecting a piece of sashimi with deliberate care. "I followed your ownership dispute with interest. Not professionally, of course. It never reached my court, but as someone who has known you both." "And your conclusion?" I asked, curious about her perspective. "That power and recognition should go to those who earn them through integrity and ability, not those who claim them through position and privilege." She met my eyes directly. "You've earned yours, Thalia. The question is what you'll do with it now." "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted, "building the firm in a new direction, establishing our reputation in corporate accountability law." "And beyond that?" she pressed gently. "Danica mentioned the judicial vacancy to you, I understand." I raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." Justice Matsuda smiled. "The legal community in Seattle is small, remember, and those of us who have fought to diversify the bench are always alert to potential candidates who bring both excellence and different perspectives. I haven't practiced long enough in my new role to qualify," I pointed out. "Not this vacancy, no," she conceded. "But in a year or two. You should consider it, Thalia. The law needs voices like yours, people who understand how power can be both used and abused." Her words stayed with me long after our lunch ended. The idea of becoming Judge Blackwell, of having the authority to ensure fairness in a system I had seen from multiple angles, was increasingly appealing. Not immediately, but as a future goal to work toward. That evening, I received an email from an unexpected source, Harlow Quinn, the former accounting manager whose evidence had been crucial to my case. She was starting a consulting firm specializing in forensic accounting for law practices and wanted to know if Blackwell Legal might be interested in being her first client. I called her immediately. "Your evidence was instrumental in establishing the truth about the firm's finances," I said, after we exchanged greetings. "I never properly thanked you." "Professional ethics matter to me," she replied simply. "What Mr. Blackwell was doing wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous for everyone associated with the firm." "Including you," I acknowledged. "It must have been difficult to leave without explanation." "Safer that way," she said, "until I could figure out how to address what I'd discovered without risking my own career. When I heard about your ownership claim, it seemed like the right moment to provide what I knew." We arranged to meet the following week to discuss her proposed consulting arrangement. Another alliance, another piece of rebuilding a firm on principles of transparency and integrity rather than power and prestige. As spring turned to summer, Blackwell Legal continued to evolve. We moved to larger offices in a renovated historic building in Pioneer Square. The exposed brick and abundant natural light a deliberate contrast to the sterile corporate environment Kieran had preferred. We established a mentorship program for young attorneys from underrepresented backgrounds. We took on cases that aligned with our values, even when they weren't the most profitable, and I continued my own evolution, from reluctant litigator to confident advocate, from traumatized spouse to independent woman. I dated occasionally, though cautiously, aware that my trust had been profoundly damaged. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. I developed new interests, sailing on Puget Sound, volunteering with a literacy program for immigrant children, taking weekend hiking trips to the Olympic Peninsula. 1 year to the day after Judge Wilson had affirmed my ownership of the firm, I hosted a gathering at my condominium. Not a formal celebration, but an acknowledgement of how far we'd all come. Imara was there, as was Lyra, Zuri, and several key associates from the firm. Justice Matsuda made a brief appearance. Even Harlow Quinn, now our regular consultant, joined us. As conversation flowed and laughter filled my once-empty home, I stepped onto the balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. The sun was setting over Elliott Bay, painting the water in shades of amber and gold, reminiscent of that fateful reunion night. But everything else had changed, most of all myself. Lyra joined, me leaning against the railing. "Happy anniversary," she said, clinking her glass against mine. 1 year of Thalia unleashed upon the world. I laughed. "That sounds vaguely threatening." "It should," she replied with a grin. "To anyone underestimating you anyway." Her expression softened. "I'm proud of you, you know. Not just for taking on Kieran, but for what you've built since then." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "For believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself." Inside, someone called for a toast. As we turned to rejoin the gathering, Lyra paused. "Oh, I heard from Mother yesterday. Apparently Kieran and Meredith are struggling in Portland. The twins are colicky. His position at Hamilton Frost isn't what he expected, and they're living well beyond their means." I was surprised to find I felt no satisfaction at this news. No vindication, no sense of justice served. Only a distant pity for the man who had once been the center of my world, now facing the consequences of choices made from arrogance and entitlement. "I hope they figure it out," I said simply. "For the children's sake." Lyra studied me, then nodded. "You really have moved on." "Yes," I agreed, looking around at the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. "I really have." 18 months after taking control of Blackwell Legal, I received an invitation that sent an unexpected jolt through my newly ordered life. The Seattle Bar Association was hosting their annual gala, an event I had once organized as Kieran's wife but never attended as a legal professional in my own right. This year's invitation addressed me as Thalia Blackwell, managing partner, a small detail that nonetheless represented the seismic shift in my identity. The cream-colored card sat on my desk for days while I debated attending. The gala would put me face-to-face with the entire legal establishment, many of whom had witnessed my transformation from supportive spouse to independent attorney with varying degrees of support or skepticism. More significantly, the invitation mentioned Kieran would be receiving the association's Distinguished Comeback Award, a thinly veiled acknowledgement of his return to practice after his ethics suspension. "You should go," Danica said when she noticed the invitation during our weekly strategy meeting. "Claim your place in the community and watch Kieran be celebrated for overcoming adversity that he created himself?" I shook my head. "I'm not sure I'm that evolved yet." Danica leaned against my desk, arms crossed. "All the more reason to be there. If you avoid it, people will say you're still affected by the divorce, that you're hiding." She was right, of course. In the Seattle legal world, perception mattered almost as much as courtroom victories. My absence would be noted and interpreted, likely not in my favor. The evening of the gala, I stood before the mirror in my Pioneer Square loft, studying my reflection with a critical eye. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the carefully curated corporate wife I'd been at my last bar association event. Tonight I wore a tailored jumpsuit in deep emerald that managed to be both elegant and unmistakably powerful, paired with my grandmother's Art Deco earrings. Not a delicate touch, but a statement of heritage and continuity. My hair, now cut into a sleek bob rather than the longer style Kieran had preferred, framed a face that looked younger somehow, despite the additional lines around my eyes. Freedom, I reflected, was a powerful, rejuvenating force. the gala was being held at the Olympic Hotel, its grand ballroom transformed with subtle lighting and extravagant floral arrangements. I arrived deliberately late, after the cocktail hour when most attendees would already be present. The strategy was calculated. No slinking in unnoticed, but rather making an entrance when the room was full enough for my presence to register. But not so late as to appear dramatic. Conversations paused as I crossed the threshold, a subtle ripple of awareness moving through the crowd. I caught snippets of whispers. Thalia Blackwell. Completely transformed the firm. That whistleblower. Before Judge Patterson spotted me and moved to my side. Thalia, she said warmly, air kissing my cheek. The entire appellate division was just discussing your brief in the Merriweather case. Brilliant work. Thank you, Your Honor, I replied, noting the nearby attorneys who had suddenly found our conversation fascinating. The First Amendment implications were particularly challenging to navigate. And navigate them you did, she affirmed, subtly positioning herself to include me in the circle of senior jurists she'd been speaking with. Colleagues, I believe most of you know Thalia Blackwell? The next hour passed in a blur of strategic conversations and careful networking. I spoke with opposing counsel from recent cases, accepted congratulations on the firm's growing reputation, and fielded subtle inquiries about whether Blackwell Legal was expanding its partner ranks. Throughout, I maintained a careful awareness of the room, noting Kieran's absence even as I engaged fully with each conversation. He arrived during dinner, just as the first course was being served. The subtle shift in energy alerted me before. I saw him, heads turning, conversations faltering, a collective holding of breath as Seattle's legal community braced for the potential drama of our first public encounter since the divorce. Kieran looked thinner than I remembered, the confident swagger somewhat diminished. Meredith was at his side, impressively composed for a woman who had endured a difficult pregnancy and was now mothering twin toddlers. They were seated at a table, across the room, far enough from mine to avoid awkward proximity, but close enough that our inevitable interaction would be widely observed. Breathe, murmured Zuri, who had accompanied me as my +1. In the months since I'd taken control of the firm, she had become not just a valued colleague, but a trusted friend. You've faced down corporate legal teams and hostile judges. You can handle one ex-husband. I smiled, appreciating her support. I'm fine. Actually, I'm surprised by how little I feel seeing him. It was true. The sight of Kieran, once the center of my world, then the focus of my anger, now evoked little more than a distant acknowledgement. The man who had once held such power over my emotions now seemed smaller somehow, less significant in the landscape of my life. The Bar Association president, Alexandra Durham, approached our table during dessert, bending to speak quietly in my ear. Thalia, I wonder if you'd consider presenting Kieran's award tonight. The scheduled presenter has a family emergency. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Alex, you can't be serious. She winced slightly. I know it's awkward, but it would be a powerful gesture of reconciliation. Show the community that the professional can transcend the personal. Find someone else, I said firmly. I've maintained professional courtesy throughout the divorce and the firm transition. That's sufficient. She straightened, clearly disappointed but unsurprised. I had to ask for the association. For the optics, I corrected with a pointed look. The answer is no. As Alexandra moved away, Zuri raised an eyebrow. The audacity. The desperation, I countered, taking a sip of wine. The original presenter must have backed out at the last minute. When the awards portion of the evening began, I maintained a polite expression as various members of the legal community were recognized for pro bono work, diversity initiatives, and career achievements. Judge Wilson received a Lifetime Achievement Award, acknowledging her trailblazing career and commitment to ethical practice. As she spoke about integrity being the cornerstone of the legal profession, her gaze briefly found mine in the audience, a subtle acknowledgement of our shared history. When it was time for Kieran's award, Alexandra introduced Judge Raymond Okoye as the presenter, a deliberate choice that didn't escape me. As chair of the ethics committee that had overseen Kieran's suspension, Judge Okoye's presence lent legitimacy to the comeback narrative while subtly reminding everyone of the underlying offense. Our profession demands integrity, Judge Okoye began, his resonant voice carrying throughout the ballroom, but it also values redemption. Tonight's recipient demonstrates that one mistake need not define an entire career. I kept my expression neutral, though inwardly I noted the revisionist history. One mistake, as if the systematic diversion of client funds over 18 months could be characterized as a momentary lapse in judgment. Kieran accepted the award with a practiced humility that almost seemed genuine. "This recognition means more than I can express," he said, surveying the room. "When you lose your way professionally, you discover who your true colleagues are, those willing to hold you accountable while believing in your capacity to learn and improve." His gaze swept the room and briefly caught mine. A flicker of something passed across his features. Recognition, perhaps, or regret. I maintained eye contact, neither hostile nor warm, simply present as one professional acknowledging another. "I'd like to thank Hamilton Frost for taking a chance on me during a difficult time," he continued. "My family for their unwavering support." A nod toward Meredith. "And those who challenged me to be better, even when that challenge was painful." Another glance in my direction, subtle enough that only those watching closely would notice. As applause filled the room, I joined, politely, my composure intact. Whatever narrative Kieran was crafting about his ethical violations and subsequent redemption, I would not be cast as either the vindictive ex-wife or the supportive enabler. I had defined my own role in this story. The formal program concluded, and the evening transitioned to coffee and networking. I was engaged in conversation with a potential client when I sensed Kieran approaching from behind. Taking a deliberate breath, I excused myself from the conversation and turned to face him. "Thalia," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of confident charm, though slightly muted now. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied. "Congratulations on your award." "A bit ironic, isn't it?" he acknowledged with a self-deprecating smile that once would have disarmed me. "Being celebrated for overcoming a situation I created." I regarded him steadily. The legal community loves a redemption story. Some parts of it, anyway. His gaze was searching. "Your firm is making quite a name for itself. The Merriweather case was impressive work." "Thank you." A brief silence stretched between us, weighted with unspoken history. Finally, he glanced toward the exit where Meredith waited, her expression carefully neutral. "I should go. The twins don't sleep well, and our nanny has an early curfew." I nodded. "Of course." He hesitated, then added quietly, "For what it's worth, Thalia, I know now what I lost. Not just the firm or the house, what I lost in you." The words were clearly intended to provoke an emotional response, regret, vindication, perhaps even lingering attachment. Instead, I felt only a calm certainty that I had moved beyond the need for his acknowledgement. "Goodbye, Kieran," I said simply. "Give my best to Meredith." As they departed, Zuri materialized at my side with a fresh glass of wine. "Well handled," she murmured, "though I was half hoping you'd throw your drink in his face just for the drama." I laughed, the tension dissipating. What a waste of good Cabernet that would have been. Later that night, as my car service navigated the rain-slicked streets toward Pioneer Square, I reflected on the evening. The encounter with Kieran had been inevitable in Seattle's close-knit legal world, and now that it had occurred, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The man who had once dominated my world now occupied only a small corner of it, a reminder of lessons learned rather than a continuing presence. My phone chimed with a text from Danica. Heard you maintained perfect composure while Kieran played for sympathy. Proud of you. Also, Judge Patterson wants to have lunch next week. I think it's about the judicial vacancy. The message reminded me of how thoroughly my professional identity had been reestablished in relatively short time. What had once seemed an impossible uphill battle, being taken seriously as an attorney after years as Kieran's wife, had been accomplished through consistent, excellent work and strategic alliances. The next morning, I was reviewing case files in my office when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Meredith Blackwell. My surprise must have shown on my face when she entered, because she immediately said, I should have called first. I apologize for the interruption. Meredith looked different from our last encounter, the glossy polish somewhat dimmed, shadows beneath her eyes suggesting the sleepless nights of new parenthood. She wore a wedding ring now, I noticed, a simple band rather than my grandmother's. Heirloom. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. How can I help you? She settled into the seat, her handbag clutched tightly in her lap. This is unconventional, but after seeing you last night, I felt I needed to speak with you directly. I waited, curious what could possibly have prompted this visit. Kieran doesn't know I'm here, she continued. He would be furious if he found out. But I wanted to thank you. Thank me? I repeated, genuinely surprised. She nodded, meeting my eyes directly. For how you handled the ethics violation. You could have pushed for disbarment. You had enough evidence. Instead, you accepted the suspension. Because of the twins. I considered her carefully. It wasn't just about your children, though they were a factor. Destroying Kieran's career completely wouldn't have served any purpose except revenge. Still, she insisted, you showed mercy when you had no reason to, especially toward me. Meredith, I said gently, whatever happened between Kieran and me, it wasn't my place to punish you or your children for it, despite what people might think. I'm not vindictive by nature. She glanced down at her hands, then back up with sudden resolve. There's something else you should know. Something Kieran doesn't know I discovered. My instincts sharpened. What is it? Before your divorce was finalized, he tried to access offshore accounts, ones I didn't know existed until I found correspondence about them while organizing his home office. She reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. These are copies of everything I found. Account numbers, transfer attempts, correspondence with financial advisors in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the envelope she placed on my desk, not reaching for it. Why are you giving me this? Meredith's expression was a complex mix of emotions, determination, fear, resignation. Because I have 2 daughters who deserve financial security, and because I've learned that Kieran's priorities shift according to what benefits him in the moment. The implication was clear. She was creating insurance for herself and her children against Kieran's potential future betrayals. Have things been difficult in Portland? I asked carefully. Her smile was tight. Let's just say the Distinguished Comeback Award papers over quite a lot of reality. Hamilton Frost isn't what he expected. The partnership track is longer. The compensation less generous. He's restless, looking for opportunities elsewhere. And you're concerned about stability, I surmised. She nodded. The twins deserve better than constant upheaval because their father can't be satisfied with what he has. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, Meredith expressing the very concerns that had never occurred to me during my marriage. I had trusted Kieran implicitly, believed in his vision for our future, never questioned his decisions. Meredith, despite being the other woman, had entered their relationship with her eyes wider open than mine had ever been. Why come to me with this? I asked. Why not a private attorney of your own? Because you already know who he is. she said simply. You won't dismiss me as paranoid or disloyal for taking precautions. I considered the envelope and its contents. The information could potentially reopen investigations into Kieran's financial dealings, perhaps even trigger criminal charges if he had hidden assets during divorce proceedings. But using it would drag me back into conflict with him just as I was moving forward professionally. I can't be your attorney in this matter, I said finally. The conflict of interest is too significant, but I can refer you to someone excellent who specializes in complex family law matters. Relief visibly washed over her. That would be helpful. Thank you. As she stood to leave, I found myself asking, Are you happy, Meredith? Despite the challenges? She considered the question with surprising thoughtfulness. The twins make me happy. Building my own consulting business makes me happy. Kieran, she paused. Kieran is complicated. I went into this with my eyes open, but that doesn't mean I wasn't still blind to certain things. After she left, I sat contemplating the sealed envelope. Using its contents against Kieran would be legally justifiable, but would inevitably pull me back into the vortex of our past. Eventually, I locked it in my personal safe, neither using the information nor destroying it, a decision that felt like the final step in prioritizing my future over the wreckage of my marriage. Later that week, I met Judge Patterson for lunch, at her favorite restaurant near the courthouse. As Danica had suspected, the judge was interested in discussing my potential candidacy for the upcoming judicial vacancy. The bench needs more diverse perspectives, she said as we lingered over coffee. Not just in terms of gender or ethnicity, but life experience. Your background, corporate law, managing a firm, rebuilding after personal setbacks, brings valuable insight. I've only recently returned to active practice, I pointed out. There are more experienced candidates. Judge Patterson smiled. Experience comes in many forms, Thalia. Your ability to navigate complex situations with integrity has been noticed by those who matter in these decisions. By those who matter, you mean? The Governor's Judicial Appointment Committee, she clarified, on which I happen to sit. The possibility of a judicial appointment was both flattering and daunting. Becoming a judge would mean stepping away from the firm I'd fought so hard to reclaim and rebuild. It would mean setting aside the satisfaction of advocacy for the more measured role of arbiter. I need time to consider it, I told her honestly. Of course, she agreed, but don't take too long. The nomination process begins in 3 months. That evening, I called Imara to discuss the unexpected opportunity. After guiding me through the divorce and firm transition, she had become not just my attorney, but a trusted advisor and friend. A judgeship is prestigious, she acknowledged after I explained the situation. But you've only just established yourself as a practicing attorney again. Are you ready to set that aside? That's what I'm trying to determine, I admitted. Part of me feels I'd be abandoning Blackwell Legal just as it's finding its footing. And the other part? I considered the question. The other part sees the potential to influence the legal system more broadly, to ensure fairness for people who might not otherwise receive it. Imara was quiet for a moment. What would serving on the bench give you that you don't have now? The question was incisive, cutting through the prestige and external validation to the core of my own desires. What did I truly want at this stage of my rebuilt life? Perspective, I realized, allowed. The ability to see the legal system from yet another angle, to apply everything I've learned about power and its uses to ensure justice, not just victory. Then I think you have your answer, Imara said simply. The next day, I convened a meeting with Danica and the other senior attorneys at Blackwell. Legal. If I were to pursue the judicial nomination, the firm would need a transition plan, one that preserved everything we'd built while allowing for new leadership. A judgeship? Danica repeated when I explained the possibility. That's a significant change of direction. It's only a possibility at this point, I emphasized, but I believe in planning ahead. If I were to pursue this opportunity, what would it mean for the firm? The conversation that followed was candid and far-reaching. Some associates expressed concern about the firm's identity without my name and reputation behind it. Others saw potential for growth under new leadership. Danica, after her initial surprise, became thoughtful. "You rebuilt this firm around principles of accountability and transparency," she observed. "Those values don't disappear if you move to the bench. In fact, you'd be extending them to a broader context." By the end of the meeting, the outlines of a transition plan had formed. Danica would step into the managing partner role, with 2 promising senior associates elevated to junior partner status. The firm's name would remain Blackwell Legal, maintaining the brand recognition we'd established while acknowledging my continued connection, even if at a distance. The discussion left me feeling more settled about the possibility ahead. The firm I'd fought for would continue its trajectory with or without my daily presence, a testament to the solid foundation we'd built together. That weekend, I took a rare day completely away from work, driving to Whidbey Island to walk along the windswept beaches and clear my head. The past 18 months had been a whirlwind of reinvention and rebuilding. Professionally successful, but leaving little time for reflection about what I truly wanted beyond proving myself capable of independence. As I walked along the shore, watching waves crash against weathered driftwood, I considered the path that had led me here. The devastating public humiliation at the firm reunion, the discovery of Kieran's betrayal, the fight for what was rightfully mine, the reclamation of my professional identity. Each step had been necessary in its time, each challenge ultimately strengthening my resolve. But what now? What did I want beyond reaction to Kieran's actions? Beyond proving my capabilities to the legal community that had once seen me only as an accessory to my husband's career? A judgeship offered prestige and influence, certainly, but it also offered something more valuable: the opportunity to apply everything I'd learned about power, fairness, and accountability to ensure justice for others navigating their own difficult circumstances. By the time I returned to my car as dusk settled over the island, my mind was made up. I would pursue the judicial nomination, not as a capstone to my comeback story, but as the beginning of a new chapter defined entirely by my own choices, rather than responses to another's actions. The following week brought another unexpected development. Harlow Quinn, whose forensic accounting evidence had been crucial to establishing Kieran's financial improprieties, requested a meeting to discuss a potential new client for her consulting firm. "The client is Hamilton Frost," she explained when we met for coffee. "They're conducting an internal audit of all partner activities following some irregularities in their Portland office." The Portland office, where Kieran now worked. The cash connection was impossible to miss. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Harlow's expression was carefully professional. "Client fund management discrepancies. Nothing proven yet, but concerning enough that they've engaged external review." I absorbed this information with a complex mixture of emotions. On one level, there was a certain grim validation, Kieran's patterns continuing in his new position, confirming my decisions had been correct. But there was also weariness at the thought of being even tangentially connected to another ethical investigation involving my ex-husband. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Client confidentiality would normally prevent such disclosure. Harlow folded her hands on the table. "Hamilton Frost has asked for references regarding my work on similar cases. Your name came up, given the thoroughness of the Blackwell and Associates investigation." "I see." The Portland firm was essentially asking for my assessment of Harlow's capabilities in uncovering financial misconduct. Misconduct potentially committed by Kieran. "I'll recuse myself from the Portland office audit if I take the engagement," Harlow assured me. "But I wanted you to know before you received any inquiries." I appreciated her transparency. Thank you for the heads up. For what it's worth, I'd give you the highest recommendation. Your work was impeccable and crucial to resolving the situation here. After she left, I sat alone, reflecting on the cyclical nature of behavior patterns. If Kieran was indeed repeating the same financial improprieties at Hamilton Frost, it suggested a compulsion beyond simple opportunism, a belief, perhaps, that rules applied differently to him than to others. My phone rang, displaying Lyra's number. When I answered, her voice held an unusual tension. "Have you heard from Kieran recently?" "No," I replied, instantly alert. "Why?" "He called me this morning, asking if I'd heard anything about an investigation at his firm. He seemed agitated." I closed my eyes briefly. "Lyra, I can't discuss anything related to Kieran's current situation." "So there is a situation," she surmised. "God, Thalia, tell me he hasn't done something stupid again." "I don't know what he has or hasn't done," I said truthfully. "And even if I did, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to discuss it." She sighed heavily. "I understand. It's just the twins. They deserve stability." "Yes, they do," I agreed, thinking of Meredith's visit and the sealed envelope in my safe. "Have you met them yet?" "Once when they were newborns," Lyra said. "Meredith reached out after they were born, invited me to visit. She seems to want them to have family connections beyond Kieran." "That's good," I said, genuinely glad the children would have Lyra's warm presence in their lives. "They're lucky to have you as an aunt." After we hung up, I found myself contemplating the ripple effects of choices made years earlier. How Kieran's decision to pursue Meredith, my decision to fight for the firm, his apparent decision to continue questionable financial practices, had all led to this moment where innocent children might face disruption through no fault of their own. The revelation of potential new improprieties at Hamilton Frost added weight to my decision to pursue the judicial nomination. If appointed, I would need to recuse myself from any matters involving Kieran, certainly. But I could still bring my understanding of how power can corrupt, and how the legal system often favors those who already possess privileges, to ensure fairness for others facing their own life-altering legal challenges. 2 days later, I formally notified Judge Patterson of my interest in the judicial vacancy. The process would be lengthy: interviews, background checks, consideration by the governor's committee. But taking this first step felt right, a deliberate choice to move beyond the narrative of reaction that had defined the past 2 years. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Justice Matsuda. "I hear congratulations are in order," she said warmly. "Judge Patterson mentioned you're pursuing the Superior Court vacancy." "News travels fast," I observed, though I wasn't entirely surprised. The legal community's grapevine was notoriously efficient. "The bench would be fortunate to have you," she continued, "though I imagine the process may include questions about your ex-husband and the firm transition." "I expect it will," I acknowledged. "I'm prepared to address those matters professionally." "I have no doubt," she said. "But I called for another reason. The Women in Law Mentorship Program is expanding, and we're seeking established attorneys to guide recent graduates. Given your unique perspective, I thought you might be interested in participating." The invitation touched me deeply. The program, which Justice Matsuda had founded early in her career, was highly regarded for connecting promising young female attorneys with successful mentors who could help them navigate the often challenging path of legal practice. "I'd be honored," I said sincerely. "Excellent. One of our mentees in particular would benefit from your guidance. She's brilliant, but struggling with confidence after experiencing dismissive treatment at her firm. Your journey might provide valuable perspective." As we concluded the call, I reflected on how thoroughly my professional identity had evolved, from the marginalized wife to recognized attorney to potential judge and now mentor. Each role built upon the lessons of the previous one. creating a foundation of experience that could potentially benefit others facing their own challenges. The following week, as my judicial application process began in earnest, the legal community's grapevine brought news I had half anticipated. Kieran had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation at Hamilton Frost. The news came not through official channels, but via a text from Danica, who had heard it from opposing counsel in a current case. "History repeating?" her message asked simply. I didn't respond, unwilling to engage in speculation about Kieran's situation. Whatever was unfolding at his Portland firm, it was no longer my concern. Not professionally, not personally, not emotionally. My focus remained on the path ahead of me, not the one behind. That evening, as I reviewed preparation materials for my judicial interview, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Meredith's voice came through, tense and controlled. "I apologize for calling so late," she began without preamble. "But I thought you should know that Kieran has been suspended pending an investigation. He's not handling it well." I set down my pen. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure why you're telling me." She hesitated. "He's been drinking, talking about how she destroyed his career, how she turned everyone against him. I don't think he means me." A chill ran through me. "Has he threatened anything specific?" "Not exactly," she said carefully. "But he's fixated on the idea that you've somehow orchestrated this investigation from Seattle, that you're behind it all." "That's completely untrue," I said firmly. "I have no connection to Hamilton Frost's internal matters." "I know that," she assured me. "But Kieran isn't thinking rationally right now. I've taken the twins to my mother's house for a few days, just until he calms down. I thought you should be aware, given your previous history." The warning was clear enough. Kieran was volatile, directing his anger toward me, and potentially unpredictable. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "Have you considered reaching out to his therapist?" The counseling had been part of his ethics suspension agreement, 12 months of regular sessions addressing decision-making and professional ethics. "He stopped going months ago," she admitted, said he didn't need it anymore once the suspension was lifted. After we hung up, I sat contemplating this new development. If Kieran truly believed I was somehow behind his current troubles, he might act on that misguided conviction. I sent a quick text to the building security team at my condo and another to Imara, briefly explaining the situation. Then I returned to my judicial preparation, refusing to let Kieran's issues derail my focus yet again. 2 days later, my concern proved warranted when the reception desk at Blackwell Legal called to inform me that Kieran was in the lobby, demanding to see me despite not having an appointment. "He seems agitated," the receptionist said quietly. "Security is standing by." I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Refusing to see him might escalate his anger, while agreeing to meet might legitimize his inappropriate behavior. After a moment's consideration, I made my decision. "Tell him I'll speak with him briefly in the main conference room," I instructed. "Ask Zuri and Anton to join us." Anton, our head of security, was a former police officer with a calm, authoritative presence. When I entered the conference room, Kieran was pacing by the windows, his appearance distinctly disheveled, unshaven, shirt wrinkled, tie askew. He turned at my entrance, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "Finally," he said, gesturing expansively. "The Queen of Blackwell Legal deigns to see me." "You have 5 minutes, Kieran," I said calmly, taking a seat at the conference table while Zuri and Anton positioned themselves near the door. "I have a court appearance this afternoon." He ran a hand through his hair, which needed cutting. "You did this. Somehow, you did this. Called your friends at Hamilton Frost, planted doubts, started whispers." "I have no connection to Hamilton Frost beyond opposing them in 2 cases last year," I stated flatly. "Whatever investigation they're conducting is their own business. Convenient timing, though, isn't it? He pressed, leaning on the table. Just as I'm rebuilding, just as things are finally stabilizing for Meredith and the twins. Suddenly, accusations appear. If there are accusations, they're based on your actions, not mine, I pointed out, just as they were here. His face flushed. You think you're so much better, don't you? The ethical attorney, the potential judge, while I'm the cautionary tale they warn law students about. Kieran, I said, my patience thinning. I didn't call this meeting. You demanded to see me based on a conspiracy theory with no foundation in reality. If you're experiencing difficulties at Hamilton Frost, I suggest you address them through proper channels rather than creating scenes in your former firm's lobby. Former firm, he repeated bitterly. My firm. The firm I built from nothing while you played hostess and edited the occasional brief. The dismissive comment, so similar to ones I'd heard throughout our marriage, no longer had the power to wound me. Is there anything else? Your 5 minutes are nearly up. He stared at me for a long moment, then sagged slightly, the anger seeming to drain away. They're going to fire me. The preliminary investigation found irregularities in how I handled the Westwood Industries retainer. I kept my expression neutral. That's between you and Hamilton Frost. Meredith took the twins to her mother's, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Says she needs space to think, as if she's the injured party here. I stood, signaling the end of our interaction. Kieran, I suggest you speak with your attorney about the Hamilton Frost matter and perhaps consider resuming therapy. This conversation isn't productive for either of us. As Anton moved to escort him out, Kieran looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between resentment and rueful recognition. You really have moved on, haven't you? All the way on. Yes, I said simply. I have. After he left, Zuri stayed behind, her expression concerned. Are you all right? I considered the question, searching for any lingering distress from the encounter. To my mild surprise, I found none. I'm fine. Actually, better than fine. That felt like the final chapter of something long finished. She nodded, understanding. Closure. Exactly. I gathered my files for the afternoon court appearance. Have security keep an eye out for him over the next few days, but I don't think he'll be back. That evening, as I prepared for my judicial interview scheduled for the following week, I reflected on the encounter with Kieran. There had been a time when his approval defined my sense of self, when his dismissal of my contributions had diminished my own perception of their value. Now, his opinion, whether positive or negative, held no power over me at all. The realization was liberating in its finality. Whatever happened with the judicial nomination, whatever the next chapter of my professional life might entail, it would be shaped entirely by my own choices and capabilities, not in reaction to or recovery from someone else's betrayal. The story, that had begun with a public humiliation at a firm reunion, had evolved into something entirely different. Not a tale of revenge or even vindication, but of reclamation and reinvention. The woman who had walked out of that rooftop celebration 18 months earlier, stunned and shaken by her husband's announcement, would barely recognize the woman who now stood on the threshold of a judicial career, secure in her achievements and her worth. 2 months later, when the governor announced my appointment to the Superior Court bench, the Seattle legal community erupted in congratulatory messages. Justice Matsuda was the first to call, followed by Judge Wilson, Imara, and dozens of colleagues. Even Alexandra Durham from the Bar Association sent flowers. The investiture ceremony was held on a bright spring morning, the courtroom filled with those who had supported my journey. Danica sat front row center as the new managing partner of Blackwell Legal. Zuri and the firm's associates filled an entire section. Lyra attended with her partner, both beaming with pride. As I took the oath, my hand resting on a constitution that promised equal justice under law, I thought about the meandering path that had led me here. Not the one I had planned. Certainly, but perhaps the one I needed. The betrayal that had once seemed like an ending had instead become the catalyst for something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. Judge Thalia Blackwell, a title earned through resilience, determination, and the courage to redefine myself when everything familiar had been stripped away. Not an ending at all, but the most promising of beginnings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.